There's a concept I've been thinking about a lot lately regarding painting a splat zone that's inspired by my time playing other games, in my particular case, League of Legends. As with previous videos where I compare to other games, I promise this will come back around to Splatoon, just bear with me. In League of Legends, to make a big oversimplification, there are two main kinds of champion, that is, one of the playable characters, that specialize in dealing damage and removing opponents from play. One of them, the AD carry, deals the highest damage per second out of any other role in the game. If you leave the enemy AD carry alone and let it get in range during a team fight, you'll lose every time because it can single-handedly do more damage than anything else on your team, and your health bars will just drain too quickly for you to have a chance at winning the fight. So the AD carry is broken, right? Well, actually right now it's considered one of the weakest roles in the game. How is a character with such a busted damage output in such bad shape? Well, sometimes damage per second, or DPS as it's abbreviated, isn't the stat that really matters the most. The other type of damage dealer, typically called either a burst mage or assassin, depending on some variables that aren't really relevant to our point here, doesn't actually do that much damage measured over a long period of time. Their abilities have pretty long cooldowns, so they spend a lot of time in a fight just doing nothing and waiting for a countdown to end so that they can press buttons again. The thing is, when they do get to press buttons, they delete an opponent by doing so. In a matchup between an AD carry and a burst mage, the burst mage wins the fight because even though their damage output drops to almost zero after they've executed one combo, that combo removes the AD carry from play on the spot and gets rid of a lot of the enemy team's damage per second before the AD carry has enough seconds to do very much damage. The game isn't all about damage over time, because there are meaningful thresholds that it's worth sprinting to, even if you'd lose the marathon. This sort of immediate massive payoff with a long cooldown is called burst damage. There are plenty of other games where the dichotomy between burst damage and DPS is important to understand, so I'm sure some of you are nodding and talking about how you learned that from an MMO you play or something. I think it's particularly important for splat zones to think about this dichotomy between burst damage and DPS, except instead of damage, be thinking about paint. Paint per second is definitely really important for maintaining control of the zone, and also for winning the zone in those last-second overtime stalemates, but we should also not discount the value of burst paint. That is, the ability to put an overwhelming amount of paint on the zone all at once to force it to flip, even if the opposing team outpaints us in the long run. Sometimes it's a huge win to be able to cap the zone and apply a penalty, even if the other team immediately flips it and takes over, because that preserves a lead and gives your team time to regroup before they need to win the zone back again. You only need to hit that 75% threshold for an instant to cap the zone and force the opponents to repaint it all over again. So if you've got 50%, and you have something you can chuck at the other team's side that'll cover 25% of it for even the shortest amount of time, that's often enough. A tri-strike is really poor in terms of paint per second because it takes a long time to charge in between uses, but all it takes is throwing two of them at the zone on Brinewater to cap it, and if you time them carefully, they can land at exactly the same time, so they're even harder to paint through in time. That makes it a powerful painting resource. A less powerful burst painting resource is a Booyah Bomb. Booyah Bombs look like they paint a lot from how widely they expand, but if you look at what actually gets left behind, it's pretty spotty, and you can put paint into the Booyah Bomb while it's expanding to neutralize its painting impact to the point that a zone doesn't even neutralize, let alone flip. It also takes a longer time to activate since it needs to charge, so you'd prefer something like a Tri-Strike or Inkstorm if paint is the main thing you need from your special. I personally recommend trying to use Booyah Bombs whenever possible on players rather than the zone. That said, if you just really need part of the zone and you're already in the air and don't see any good targets otherwise, it's not a bad idea to paint with it, especially if you start putting paint down with your main weapon when you land, increasing the burst paint output even more by combining the Booyah Bomb's burst paint with your main weapon's paint per second. Another aspect of burst paint is that it matters what area on the zone you're targeting with it. Typically, the strongest painting weapons are pretty short-ranged, so if you've got one on your team, they're either painting your side of the zone, or one team has gained map control that allows them to have control of the zone anyway, so paint output isn't the major deciding factor of who's scoring. It's the enemy team's side that's more difficult to control, because they're scary people over there. It's a lot less safe to push up that far, especially for weapons that don't have a lot of range. This is where it becomes useful, despite the poor ink tank efficiency, to throw bombs or use specials for painting the zone. Watch how Kyo plays the end of this Ultra Stamp. He throws the stamp at the back corner of the zone, as much to prevent anyone from painting from there as to paint the zone itself, rolls a torpedo, again not a very ink-efficient option since it takes so much of the tank away, and then fires one charge shot to cover an angle the stamp and torpedo didn't. This isn't a lot of paint for the amount of resources required to get it, but it works because all of that paint and pressure lands at the same time and the zone flips, giving him time to recharge ink before he's going to need to use it again. Notice how, as Kyo is doing this, teammates are painting their side of the zone to ensure that it caps. When you've got burst paint, it's really important to make it count because you're not going to get another opportunity to use it for a while, and having exhausted all those resources, the zone will probably go to the enemy side if it doesn't succeed. If you see a teammate using a significant resource on the zone like that, make sure to follow up by painting it yourself, unless you're completely sure that the zone won't cap from that effort and that it'll be unsafe to try. Recognizing these patterns should help a lot with getting those clutch zone caps to save lead or end the game in your favor.